Well, good morning. Thank you for all being here. We'll get started. Earlier this morning, I signed House Bill 1044, which appropriates the funding for rural health transformation. This plan was put together with extensive input from stakeholders, which include rural communities, the Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board, and healthcare providers. They told us what they needed, and this plan delivers it. I'd like to say thank you to the House and to the Senate and their members for getting this to my desk so quickly. In my State of the State address, I said that I hope that this bill would be the first one that I signed this year, and we achieved that. So that's good, because the federal government will reward the states that act quickly on this issue. With that, I'll turn it over for questions.
Governor Bob Mercer with Calland News. Can you give us some examples of what the plan would do? What the rural health transformation plan would do?
Yes, we should have Laura in here. Laura could go into a lot greater detail, but I'll just say this: it's rural healthcare access, and for South Dakota, I think we've done a pretty, maybe by coincidence, but I think we've set ourselves up in a great position to take advantage of a program like this, because obviously we have a lot of areas. For me, being from Union Center, South Dakota, I understand the issues that we have in rural communities and the voids we have in healthcare. It was last Sunday. I'll tell a little story. Last Sunday I was in church. My brother John is 6 years older than me, and a deputy sheriff in the middle of Meade County, largest county in the state, and he got a call and slipped out of church. Later found out it was a neighbor out in that area that they decided to have an in-home birth, and she had issues, and they had to life flight her to Rapid City. I say all that because we're actually closer to healthcare than a lot of areas in my county. You get up north of, you can be 2 hours away from the closest healthcare. We've set ourselves up with a lot of things like telehealth, and this program will be a source, because so much of those rural areas to set them up has a huge cost, and I think this will be invaluable for areas in these rural areas to modernize and take advantage of things like telehealth, where they can be in direct contact in an ambulance in Harding County, 2.5 hours from the nearest hospital, and be in direct contact with the physician that's giving them instructions on care. I think that's just one example, but to me, it's a great example of the benefits of this kind of resources to help modernize our rural healthcare in South Dakota.
Governor, on the rural health note, there's a resolution going through right now that would ask voters to do away with Medicaid expansion. A lot of the hospitals say that would be a real concern for rural health. I'm kind of curious what your stance is on that resolution, if you have a sentiment on it.
Well, have not paid much attention to it. We're keeping track of all the legislation that's going through. I'm not up to speed on where it's at in the process, but we have a good process here in place, and issues like that, they'll take care of themselves. When the process we go through with the committee hearings and everybody that has a dog in the fight, their ability to get to the pier and talk through those issues, I'm pretty confident that we'll have this figured out before it gets through the process.
Can I say a little bit?
Yeah, certainly.
As you know, when I was in the legislature, I spent a lot of time on the Medicaid expansion issue. I can understand the thought of an amendment like that, because it's kind of strange that a policy question like Medicaid expansion is in the state constitution. You know, the state constitution should be the rights of the people and the structure of the government, not specific policy. And so I understand the thinking there. You guys know, I think, that I was the sponsor of Amendment F, which passed last time, which allows a work requirement in Medicaid expansion. And I'm also the sponsor of an amendment that'll be on the ballot this year that says that if the federal government reneges on the 90-10 match for Medicaid expansion, that the constitutional obligation to participate goes away. That's already on the ballot. So I would just add that I hope legislators think about the idea of putting both of those ballot measures on the same ballot, the one that's already there about the 90-10 rule and just a straight up repeal, and what effect those would have on each other. I can't say that I have a firm opinion about that in my mind, but I would be worried about how they interplay with each other being on the same ballot.
Thanks, Tony.
So in some of the discussions with that specific resolution, and there's another one in there for another amendment, I guess, a lot of people have brought up worries this election because there is so much on the ballot. I guess, do you share those concerns, or I guess, how do you view that, knowing that it's going to be a pretty stacked ballot this time around?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is yes. I've expressed myself quite often. Even had a meeting the other day with some legislators that were bringing another joint resolution, and I've been very outspoken when I was in the legislature when they were bringing these issues, because I think we've tried to hang too many things into our Constitution. And my broad rule, I remember getting a little bit of trouble for my vernacular one time in committee. It says, we need to quit putting stuff in our Constitution. Our Constitution was written as succinctly and plainly as it should have been. We make a mistake when we start trying to legislate in our Constitution and putting more and more and more stuff, regardless of whether it's a good idea or not. There's consequences to putting things to a vote of the people that like it, and so they vote for it, and they don't really understand the implications of filling our Constitution with it, these individual items or agendas. Anything to add?
Governor, you've asked the Supreme Court for a advisory opinion on the role of the lieutenant governor. Can you bring us up to date on where that's at? Has the court responded to you, and if so, what's next?
Yes, well, the court has responded, and they will consider that. I think I'll let Tony answer, because you know where the process better me from the legal process, but I think they've asked to offer, I'll just let Tony visit that.
Yeah, you know, the process for advisory opinions is pretty flexible. And in the past, many times when you ask an advisory opinion from the governor, the court will either decline, and they say this isn't something we feel we should answer, or they will just answer it without any intervening steps. In this case, they came back yesterday and asked that we submit a brief explaining our position, and that the Senate leadership submit a brief explaining their position, Senator Carr's position, by Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, which I take as a good development because it indicates that they are likely to answer the question and that they're expediting it, that they're doing it quickly. So I take that as a good thing. I've told the senators this, I've said this in other forums. My job as president of the Senate is to run that body in a fair and neutral way according to the rules. So when this issue came up, I made the ruling I did based on my understanding of the Constitution, but also the long-standing precedent that the Senate has operated under. I do understand the opposing argument. It's a colorable argument. And my hope is that the Supreme Court answers it quickly. What I really want is an answer one way or the other so that we all know what the rule is going forward. It's not good to be in this limbo where it's still somewhat of a question. Each time there's a tie right now, we could have this same procedural question over and over. And that's not a good situation to be in.
obviously there's been this quite, I've been asking Republicans, Democrats, everybody about the future of data centers in the state. There's been a huge debate about providing tax incentives for these data centers that can go up to 50 years. And then others are proposing banning that idea in the state. And so just wanted to get your thoughts about what is the approach, what would be best for South Dakota?
Yeah, well, I think my perspective has been, you know, like I said before, we have a great process to go through, and there's a lot of avenues to bring the sides together and communicate, convene meetings, and talk through the issues. I think for me, it's some of it's a little frustrating to hear it because we talk a lot. Legislators talk a big game about local control a lot of times, and then we'll bring legislation that completely prohibits local control in some cases, and so there's a lot of things at play here. My view is we are going to keep South Dakota open for opportunities and open for business. And what that looks like as we work through the process, we'll take it one day at a time, one committee hearing at a time, one floor debate at a time. But we have a good process, and we have more than ample opportunity for the public to get engaged and weigh in, and industry and business. So we'll see how it plays out.
Governor, have you given any further thought to providing any state aid to schools? I know you recommended zero to the legislature essentially 2 months ago. Have conditions changed so that you could recommend an increase?
You know, as we've moved farther through this and got more numbers, actual numbers in, I think the last month we got, since the state of the state or the budget address, we've had updated numbers, and so far what we've seen is that nothing significant has changed about our revenue streams and where we'll be at on ongoing dollars. So my position hasn't changed as far as what we laid out in the budget address.
And then just to follow up, there's a state law that says there shall be an increase. How do you justify your position given the state law?
Well, yeah, we've talked about that in the past. I know there are years. In fact, I was talking to a legislator this year that was wanting to change that just to make it, because we've been all over the board. In the last 4 or 5 years, we've actually been above the number, and that's, as I stated in the budget address, if you take the last, was it since 2020? The last 5 or 6 years, and include this year, what the statutory requirement of that was and where we're at, we're still 6% above what that statute would have required. But in years past, when I was a legislator, I remember talking to a group of school teachers. It was a year that, like this, where the budget was tight and they had no increases or minimal increases, and people were pounding on me about that number. It's, well, you gotta understand, these are the lawmakers, and they make the laws and they suspend the laws. That's their prerogative. So I'm not part of that branch of government anymore, but that's basically where it stands.
Governor, Commander Greg Bovino with the U.S. Border Patrol took video at Mount Rushmore yesterday. Do you know if he did any official business while he was in South Dakota?
Who was it? It was
U.S. Border Control Commander Greg Bovino, who was leading the ICE operations in Minnesota and was removed from that position. He was taking video at Mount Rushmore yesterday. Do you know if he did any official business? You obviously had no contact with him.
no contact, no idea. Sorry.
Governor, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Also, last week you voiced your support for Senate Bill 113, which was about raising to Class 6 felony penalties for disrupting with threat or violence religious services. I'm wondering if you've talked to any faith leaders in South Dakota about that legislation and what their thoughts have been on it.
I have not, other than Will Graham, and he was out last week, and that was the day that we had the press conference. He stood with us at the press conference, but he and I visited about it, and he's a name brand faith leader, I think.
One more, and that was the NRA criticized DHS Secretary Kristi Noem for her characterization of Alex Preddy, who was a lawful gun owner. To be clear for people in South Dakota, under South Dakota law, are South Dakotans allowed to carry guns to protests if those guns are legally permitted?
Yes.
Thank you.
Governor, has there been conversations about just sunsetting the sales tax back to 4.5 early so that we can address some of these like funding concerns we have this year?
You know, it's interesting because early on, there was a lot of chatter about it. I've not seen any legislation introduced at this point. Have you seen it?
I've heard there might be, but there hasn't been anything filed.
Do you have a stance on that?
No, I wouldn't have a stance on a legislation I haven't seen introduced at this point. There's talk about one plan to introduce legislation to just take the step and make that tax cut permanent, remove the sunset for next year, and other plans. We've all heard about plans to use that extra money either this year or next year, depending on whose plan you're looking at, and using that for tax relief. I have been very outspoken in that is just a wrong-headed idea, regardless of the whole conversation about the 0.3. It's just a bad plan for a lot of other reasons.
We're going to go to the phones for a few questions, and then we'll come back to the room.
Governor Joe Sneevy, Dakota Scout.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, sorry I can't be up there. Hey, this fake meat bill that would prohibit, or it would make, lab-grown meat considered an adulterated product. It would be illegal to sell commercially in South Dakota if this bill passes. We saw division among the cattle producers that are legislators yesterday on the House floor. I thought of you right away. I wonder where the governor's at. You know more about cattle than anybody up here. So where are you at on that? Free market versus afraid of what's coming?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. We've been having those conversations internally. And it's interesting even among the cattle industry, the people that support that versus don't, the free market versus not. And for me, I look forward to hearing the conversations as it works through the process. Because obviously, if it comes to fake meat, my views are pretty clear, my personal views. But that's one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin is, our values, and if we start taking steps to ban products just because we don't like them that have been approved by the FDA and otherwise are totally legal, then we start setting a precedence that violates our own principles and the principles that have made South Dakota the freest state in the nation, I think. We follow the rule of law, and so we can't just pick and choose when we want to support people's ability to bring a product no matter how much you don't like it. And then you let the marketplace and you let the people speak with their voice and not buying that product. So interesting conversation, and we'll see how it all plays out.
Safe to say we won't.
Does that mean you're not sure if you sign it or not at this point?
Yes, if you sign it or not.
Oh, I wouldn't comment on whether I'd sign something that I haven't seen that's not in front of me yet or been through the process.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the phones? Okay, we'll come back to the room then for a few more.
Between the two of you, you can maybe explain this. Your 12.5% reserve fund idea. As I understand the way reserves are set up, we actually have a budget reserve and then a second reserve account, that there are two accounts. So first of all, is that correct? And then secondly, what would you do with the second account under your proposal?
Well, I'll let Tony respond to, the nuts and bolts. You're correct, there are two funds, and Tony can commit to that. But I will say that as a starting point, there's a lot of conversation about that reserve and the use of that. I think a lot of that is founded in just maybe a fundamental misunderstanding of the difference between ongoing and one-time funds. And a lot of people have looked at that as a source to address some of the problems like school funding. And there again, that reserve represents one-time dollars. And I am fully convinced, based on history, that and the facts, that it is a huge mistake for obvious reasons to use one-time dollars to put in place in ongoing expenditures like education funding or other areas like that. Point one. Point two, there's a misunderstanding where that people feel like we've built up to this 12.5%. The fact of the matter is that fund was at 20%. That's when we had added additional dollars when the prison vote went down last year for one area where we used that as a reserve for that. So we were at 20%. It was at 16% when I did the budget address and proposed lowering from 16% to 12.5%. So I think that's valid information that we should all understand. And maybe Tony, you could talk a little more in detail about the funds, the two different funds, budget reserve fund, rainy day funds, all that.
Yeah, thank you. We often talk about the budget reserve funds in a general way, or the rainy day funds, which are two colloquial terms for the same thing. Bob Mercer is right. We have two reserve funds. We have the reserve fund, the budget reserve, which was created in the Mickelson administration. And then the second fund was created by Governor Janklow when he did property tax relief, and it was called the Property Tax Reduction Fund. During the Dugard administration, the name of that was changed to the General Revenue Replacement Fund. So when we talk about our reserves or rainy day funds, we're talking about those two things, the budget reserve and the General Revenue Replacement Fund. There are more restrictions on the budget reserve, less restrictions on the General Revenue Replacement Fund. But as a practical matter, from a legislative perspective, you can think of it as one thing, and that's what we always do. The longstanding policy has been to keep that at least 10%. As the governor said, it had gotten up to 20, or maybe just short of 20. A year ago, when we built the prison, we spent that down to 16. And the proposal this year is to spend it down further to 12.5. So as the governor said, there's this idea that we're building the reserve up to 12.5, and that's not correct. I also agree with the governor that we haven't seen, and we're up to bill filing deadlines, but we haven't seen all the legislative ideas for spending yet. But it does seem like a lot of the appetite for using the reserves is because of the lack of ongoing money, and that would be a fundamental mistake in how we budget. There's one more thing I wanted to say about all this. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. I can't remember the other point I was going to make.
We have time for 2 more questions.
I just wanted to circle back to kind of what we were talking about regarding, in tangent, your predecessor, Secretary Noem. There, at the congressional level, there's been, of course, plenty of calls by Democrats to have her removed from her position, and even threatening to use that when it comes to this upcoming shutdown. And since we last talked, there was another incident, situation of a man being shot by ICE agents. My first question is, your confidence in Noem, has that changed since we last talked? And what do you think about what congressional Democrats are saying about Secretary Noem?
Well, Well, first answer is my position has not changed. And it was encouraging to me because I know that she's been getting a lot of press, and it was encouraging to me to hear that President Trump has, first of all, has taken steps to kind of lower the temperature and open the line of communication. And that's encouraging. I think that needed to happen. But he also stood firm with his support of Kristi Noem, and I'm in the same place. My opinion of her has not changed. I've watched her. We text occasionally. I've tried to encourage her because I know she's got a tough job, and I still think she's up to the task.
Your thoughts about congressional Democrats, continuing to call for her resignation and like seemingly using that wish as like leverage to maybe have
Yeah.
another shutdown.
Well, I'll be real honest with you. I have a lot of contempt for some of the actions in Congress. I think they've been dysfunctional in a lot of ways, and that's just another demonstration of that dysfunction. They're opportunists that look for issues like this to beat their chest on and make a lot of noise, and they accomplish nothing. So that, in a nutshell, is where it's at for me.
We'll go to Jackson here for the last one.
So in the press conference with the South Dakota Democrats earlier today, they expressed disappointment in Republican leadership here in the state and their silence on the death of Alex Preddy in Minnesota that happened over the weekend by ICE. I guess, do you care to comment on it, or do you have anything to say in regards to his death?
I don't.
Thank you guys, appreciate you being here.
Let me just clarify a little bit with that. I don't have a comment because I don't know the details. I'm not privy to the details. We know for a fact that he had a loaded firearm with him. Whether he was legal or not, I've never heard, when they were saying that before it was even being investigated. So I never got confirmation that wasn't in fact the truth. But whether it was or wasn't, there's all kinds of information that I am not aware of. So why would I make a comment basing my opinion with no grounding in fact? And I think that's a big part of the problem that we face in some of these issues is people jumping to conclusions and then standing their ground and making absurd statements based on conjecture. You owe it as a public official, you owe it to the public, and you owe it to yourself and your own moral conscience to know for a fact that what you're speaking is the truth before you speak it. Thank you all for being here. Do you have one more question?
Just circling back to the Senate bill last week with the protest in the church, did you feel that you had all the facts of that case, even though charges weren't filed yet and those people have been released from custody to promote legislation that would change the law? You took a very strong stand last week about
Yep.
that action. Did you feel like you had the facts then and you don't have the facts about Alex Preddy? Help us understand the difference in your thinking.
The basis of the facts that I had back then of what I witnessed personally and saw on the TV. And so I was making just those opinions were based on what I had physically seen that was pretty well documented and pretty plain. Thank you all.
Thank you guys.
Go ahead.
And I would just remind you that using violence or threats of violence to disrupt a church service in South Dakota is already a crime. The governor's bill is increasing the penalty from a Class 1 misdemeanor to a Class 6 felony. It's already a crime. So I don't think you need to look at a particular case in another state to know that in a general way, this is not the kind of behavior we would want.
Thank you, appreciate you all.
Thank you all.